Hey, son.
Howdy.
I I've been in the Copper Country, the very upper part of Upper Peninsula in Michigan. It's like the seedy part of Finland, and about 9 days out of the year, it is absolutely beautiful, among the most lovely places in the world. The rest of the year, if you're not there on one of those 9 days, it's a bit of a hellish landscape. But this isn't race day. It's July 4th, Independence Day. Had me thinking back. It was 30 years ago today, Independence Day. Lex Luger body slamming the massive Yokozuna. It was on a ship, I believe. My memory is fading, but that's an all-time great July 4th memory. Seeing Lex Luger body slam Yokozuna, who was like 600 pounds, I think. All right, so you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Hello, welcome to Hard Compound, the American take on Formula One. We recently watched Austrian Grand Prix. Max ran away with it, but it was a fun race. A lot of battles. 4 teams finish in the top 5. Checo coming from way, way back. Carlos and Charles having to battle. Lando finally shows up. McLaren finally shows up. Alonso, he's been showing up. Son, can I get your take on the Austrian Grand Prix?
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of it. I think it was a fun race. It was a little bit like watching Oprah out there with all the penalties that got handed out. But no, on the whole, it was a lot of fun. Good weekend. Tons of teams that really like Austria, really like that track, and performed pretty well. So it was good to see, like you mentioned, the Ferraris doing well, and Lando and his McLaren finally getting up there again. And then, of course, Max is just continuing to run away with the championship at this point.
Yeah, there was one race, I think it was Monza, Italy, rained out. Um, so Austria should have been the 10th race of the year. It's only the ninth, but Red Bull have won all 9. That's 9 in a row. McLaren have the record with 11. I do believe Red Bull can tie or break that record. Similarly, Max, another victory. He now moves 5th all time, 1 ahead of the legend Ayrton Senna. I mentioned earlier 4 cars in the top 5. I think, despite Max being on a whole other level, that this was some of the best racing we've had all season. How about your top 5? Because it was a good one.
Yeah, it was a good one, and lucky for us, we got a lot of racing and qualifying to watch this weekend because of the sprint there. So we got to see all of these guys do a lot of laps, and it was a lot of fun. So for me, I think the best driver of the weekend. It was a little bit of a tough one with the top 2, but I have Lando as my top driver of the weekend.
Wow. Okay.
And that subpar McLaren that's been poor pretty much all season, it showed up this weekend. But I mean, you saw Piastri continue to struggle, and Lando in every single qualifying and race this weekend was pretty much in the top 5. Um, so he ended up doing extremely well. Battled with pretty much everyone that he had a chance to battle with, and held off or passed pretty much everyone. So I think ultimately Lando was, at the very least, one of the top 2 drivers this weekend. Then number 2, I have Max. I think it's pretty clear at this point. You know, he's the best driver currently on the grid, in the best car currently on the grid, and he is demolishing everybody. Um, which I mean, it sometimes is kind of annoying to watch because you don't really have a fight for first place, but it's also just awesome to see. I mean, it's really impressive what he's been able to accomplish, and um, once again this weekend, he's just running away with it.
Yeah, we've been in these eras of Formula One where constructors and drivers are just dominant for years. The Schumacher years, for the Ferrari, the Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton years. Rosberg was up there, but not at the same level. Vettel was one of the greats 4 years. We're seeing it now. I think we want competitive racing. We want to see them battle, and not just battle for second, third, fourth. We want to see the 10th team to have a shot at it. We want to see Hulkenberg and Magnussen have a shot at it. But I just think that right now he's in the best car and Max is the best driver. I mean, so as much as we want to see the great racing and battles for first, I think we sort of need to recalibrate our focus. And yeah, it's great how all these cars are doing, all the changes they make regularly, the updates they're bringing. They're always trying to compete. Watching the battles for second, third, fourth, and fifth, and just right now, like I said, I've said this before, Max is like Michael Jordan during his peak era. And so we are just going to see, it's sort of like, let's appreciate that he's going to sort of remake the sport in a lot of ways and just sort of, enjoy that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, I think, to see how we've kind of transitioned from Mercedes and Lewis doing basically the same thing to now Max and Red Bull. Just sort of standing atop the F1 ladder and not even being challenged by anybody. So it's awesome to see two of the greats in the history, or that will be in the history of the sport, kind of back to back in their primes with the top constructor. So, but I guess moving on to the rest of my top five, I have both Ferrari drivers, Leclerc and then Sainz. I think both did really well this weekend. Really got some important points for Ferrari, and kind of wiped the floor with Mercedes a little bit there. So, they are looking like they're on the right track, and both of those drivers looked really good this weekend.
Yeah, that was a bit eye-opening because we keep hearing about all the upgrades Mercedes is bringing, how much better they are, how much faster they're getting, how much more comfortable Lewis is in this car. And here we have a race where, I know the Austria track, the Red Bull Ring is not a typical track, but yeah, like you said, Ferrari really took it to Mercedes, and that was fun to see.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, I have Hulkenberg. um, Unfortunately, in the actual race, he ended up not being able to finish that. But throughout the rest of the weekend, I thought he was really flying for Haas, and that's fun to see. He's been really good in qualifying throughout the whole season, and he showed it again in the sprint. He held his own for as long as he could and held off Perez for a number of laps at the beginning there. Um, Unfortunately, the Haas kind of runs through its tires pretty quickly, so his pace drops off relatively fast. But um, he shows what that car is capable of at its very peak, and I think that's good to see. And he did it again this weekend.
For all that Gunther Steiner, the Haas team principal, gets wrong, which is most, most of the things is what Gunther gets wrong. Um, he what he got right was what he needed in that car for that team were two solid veteran drivers, and he has them: Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. And it's surprising to see how much Nico is besting Magnussen week in, week out. There's quite a gap there, and I think that speaks to Nico's talent. So you have Lando, Max, Charles, Carlos, and Hulkenberg as your top five. I will not argue with those. What I will argue with is the notion that races aren't decided on track. The Austrian Grand Prix, I think, was one of the most fun races we've had all year. And just so many great drives, so many great drivers. It really was fun. Plus the sprint. The haters going to hate, but that sprint was another fun event. And especially if you paid to sit there on a Saturday at the Red Bull Ring. But we kept hearing about cars exceeding track limits. Ultimately, FIA, I think, said there was over 1,200 incidents that the various stewards and track officials took down. And so even though it didn't change the podium results, the 1, 2, 3, it did change the results somewhat significantly. And that didn't happen until 5 hours after the race. When I mean the garages, the paddocks were packed up. Sky, the Sky race crew was on the plane back home. We were all doing something else. And I just hate that. I think unless there's some cheating, like let's say, a team didn't put in the correct fuel amount, for example, or did some sort of cheating that's found out later, or there's some just absolutely egregious, almost unforgivable act, it needs to be decided on track. If a ref, what's that game they like in England? Soccer. If a ref misses an offsides, or there was a bunch of, skirmishes, hands, elbows out, and they maybe miss it, or, something happens. I don't know. The game is decided, when they blow the whistle. I think when the cars cross the checkered flag, it's done. And, we can say, well, this was an inordinate amount of track limits, or us fans watching, we don't care. Track limits, exceeding track limits, we don't care. We want them to go fast around those corners, for example. Or, why can't these race tracks design themselves, just F1 specifically, and so they that is no longer an issue. I don't really care about any of that stuff. What I care about is races need to be decided during the race, and when the checkered flag is waved, it's over.
I would strongly agree with that statement. No, it's frustrating to you think what the race result is, and then hours and hours go by, and then you hear, oh, actually, this is the real race result. It's really not fair to anyone, and for the drivers specifically, you're racing hard, you're going at it for an hour and a half, 70 plus laps on this track, and maybe you get a couple of notifications that, oh, you exceeded track limits here, be more careful or whatever, but those are things that the stewards realistically should be able to tell instantly. And if that's the case, then that needs to be, those penalties need to be handed out immediately. If they're not, then, that's the end of that. You don't get to hand out those penalties anymore. I mean, that's happened a couple of times, right? This season, I think Alonso lost a podium, and then appealed a day later, and then was reinstated, and then all that kind of crap happens, and really, I think you're right. At the end of the race, when that checkered flag comes out, how you cross the line, that is how you finish, and it should be that way.
Yep, that's what I think as well. Another topic, Max is not the most interesting person. He's an amazing driver. He'll go down, I think, in history as one of the great of all time. Similar to Lewis Hamilton, I did not find him to be a terribly interesting person. But I think because when they are at their peak, they are just locked in. This is what they do. This is who they are. They are the greatest driver in the world, for example. And, I thought it was interesting because it was during this race, where Lewis Hamilton was sort of whining on the radio. And we don't usually hear him do that. And he whined several times. I mean, he was complaining about Lando. He was complaining about others going off track limits, about him being penalized for exceeding track limits. And, it was like, and then Toto was like, look, just race. We know the car's bad, man. Just race the car. But I was hoping that there would be more exchanges between those two. I would love a nice little Toto Lewis villain story. I know before the show I was talking about a fun WWE memory, big time wrestling memory. Another great memory, also about 30 years ago, was when the Hulkster attacked Randy the Macho Man Savage and then revealed himself to be a member of the NWO. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if Lewis just sort of complained, and him and Toto were in a little battle, a little fight, a little argument, a little spat. And then, because Lewis still hasn't signed with Mercedes again, he still has not signed this contract. We've heard all season long, it's coming. He still hasn't signed. And then Lewis just sort of shocks everybody, signs with Ferrari, for example, or with Red Bull. We want our Hulkster NWO moment.
That would be awesome. That would be a lot of fun. I hope that Lewis pulls something out of the bag and just runs with it. I think that would be fun and exciting, and it would shake things up in F1. Yeah, I mean, he was upset this weekend. I think with the car being slow comparatively to everybody else, and getting that penalty early on, and sort of not being aware of anybody else getting a similar penalty, really irked him. And Toto didn't want to hear it. he just got annoyed, like a frustrated parent dealing with a whiny child. But yes, I can definitely see, or I can hope that something ridiculous and crazy happens with the Hamilton saga. And he doesn't sign with Mercedes, and he signs with, one of the other big teams. And, if we have like a Lando Lewis swap, McLaren to Mercedes, I don't know. I think it would be fun.
That would be a good one.
Or, Lawrence Stroll boots his son, brings in Lewis Hamilton.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Lawrence Stroll, he would be the head of the NWO. Yeah. That would be an awesome one. That would be a good one. Although a Lando George team at Mercedes would be fun to watch. Yeah. Let's see. Austria Grand Prix 2023, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Sergio Perez on the podium. Who do you have on the virtual podium?
Well, on the virtual podium, I decided to put the F1 low carbon energy generation system that they were piloting here in Austria.
Mhm.
As I think most fans of the sport are aware, F1 is trying to move towards a carbon neutral, I don't know, just like state uh, in a few years' time. And so this was kind of one of their steps to doing that. And, it reduced just sort of carbon generation by 90% from last year's Austrian Grand Prix in the pit lane, paddock, all that kind of stuff. And uh, teams didn't have to bring their own generators to supply power for their team activities. So I think on the whole, it's a pretty cool system if they can implement something like that. On these permanent tracks that F1 goes to every year. I think it would be pretty beneficial for both teams monetarily because renting generators and transporting them is very expensive. And I think basically F1's desire to go carbon neutral. So
That's a great one. I now feel bad about mine because mine is the skydiver dude.
the dude that fell out of the sky.
Right. I mean, it looked really good up until that last 10 feet,
Yeah.
It was that last 10 feet that was just, that's where he made his error. But I thought that was a good one. A good,
Yeah, that
I
guy
put,
was fun though. It was really cool, and then he just had a bit of a crash landing, which was also cool, but I don't think he meant it that way.
exactly. He definitely exceeded track limits, that fellow. Um, okay, let's switch to the soft compound, Patrick. The current standings: Max Verstappen, his teammate Sergio Perez, then Fernando and Lewis, very close. Could we possibly, realistically, hopefully have an all WDC 1, 2, 3? Could we have the 2023 season finish with Max, Lewis, and Alonso? Or possibly even Max, Alonso, Lewis?
Yeah, I mean, that would be very, very cool. I just don't see it happening um, unless Red Bull, for whatever reason, decide to boot Perez in the middle of the season. I just think there's no way that in a car that's as good as that Red Bull, that he can screw up enough for the likes of Lewis and Alonso to catch him. He's had since Miami a really poor season. Sergio this weekend started out pretty rough. But he made up for it in the sprint, and then in the race, he pretty much climbed as high as he could, getting back on the podium. So, and Lewis and Fernando, there was absolutely nothing they could do to stave him off at all. So I think that shows you the pace that the Red Bull has and that Sergio innately has if he can, find that pace week in and week out.
Yeah, Sergio seems to be one of those guys where, he's at his best if he starts somewhere between 15 and 20.
Yeah.
Then he's battling it out. When he starts in the top 5, especially if he's on the front row, he seems lost. So I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it is. Now, we heard the news that Red Bull intends to change the name of the AlphaTauri team. It used to be Toro Rosso. We don't know what the name will be. We don't know exactly why they're doing this. It's probably just a corporate branding issue, given that nobody in the world, not even in Europe, cares about the brand AlphaTauri, I don't believe. But I've long discussed on this program my conspiracy theory, which is that Red Bull is looking to sell AlphaTauri. These teams are now worth about $1 billion. And I, in here in the U.S., like if you own a baseball team and you want to sell it, you just start cutting costs, cutting costs. You cut contracts. You start like cutting people out of your farm system. I, I mean, there's no reason why AlphaTauri should be in 10th place. AlphaTauri has, I believe, only 2 points. They are woeful. Williams has 3 times as many points, I think. This is so I'm getting more and more convinced. My conspiracy theory is that Red Bull corporate is sabotaging AlphaTauri and in hopes of selling the team. And that's sort of their excuse. Like, look, this team is dragging us down. We don't want them to be part of the Red Bull brand. You can tell that they're sort of a distinct team from us. They're obviously not a sister team if one is number one, well ahead of everyone else, and the other team can't even battle Williams. So,
yeah, I mean, I think devoting more time, money, and resources to the main team is advantageous for Red Bull currently. I don't believe that corporately AlphaTauri is really benefiting Red Bull as a whole. So I don't see any reason why they would, not choose to cut ties with that team and just sell it off and make a quick buck and then devote all of their resources to the main team. It seems logical to me. I mean, just a few years ago, we were seeing lots of good young drivers come up through that team and then into the Red Bull team. We saw race wins from Toro Rosso and AlphaTauri. I mean, Pierre Gasly just a couple years ago. And then they kind of fell off a cliff. And that's not something that I think anybody necessarily expected. And I think it seems like what you are suggesting is a very real possibility.
Perhaps not as real a possibility. An organization called WTF1, I see, has started discussing a topic that we have broached many times on this show, which is, when does Lawrence Stroll fire his son, Lance Stroll? And will he? I'm of the opinion he will not. Lance is a fine young driver. Not great, but he's fine. And the valuations of these teams continue to go up. The F1 team benefits corporate Aston Martin. They have Fernando Alonso, one of the all-time greats. I see no real reason that Lawrence Stroll will fire his son anytime soon, even if we might wish that just for sort of the thrill of it. And because we think there are some better young drivers out there. What do you think of that?
I agree. No, I highly, highly doubt that he will fire Lance Stroll. He's, at the very least capable as a driver. And I see no reason why his dad would just fire him. There's really not a massive benefit for him to do such a thing. I think, yes, for the pure entertainment, it would be exciting and fun to see, and to see who the replacement would then be. But I don't foresee that happening at all.
I do not either, but it is fun to think about. Now, another big story this past week was more private equity money flowing into F1. This particular group included several celebrities like Ryan Reynolds, and they bought a portion of the Alpine team, former Renault team. based on what they paid and what they got, everyone reevaluated what we now think are more appropriate valuations of each team.
Mm.
And they are about $1 billion each. Ferrari, the highest, just over 3 billion. Mercedes and Red Bull, I think around 2.5 billion or so. The others, just over 1 billion or so. I mean, this is massive. When the recent agreement, I think from a year or two ago, is they said if a new team was going to be allowed to join, there would be an entry fee of about 200 million, which I think the NHL used to charge. And now these teams are valued on average over 1 billion. So I was just thinking, man, the growing popularity of Formula One, especially in the US, especially as a branding opportunity, this branded equity, it's just huge. I also thought, man, the Williams team is valued at over $1 billion. It, as bad as Claire Williams was at running that team, and she was bad at running that team. I mean, maybe her worst decision happened years after she was no longer running the team, which was, damn, she sold that thing way too early. I don't know what she got for the Williams team, but I'm guessing she left several $100 million on the table.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few teams that you can look at and kind of in awe of why the hell they're valued so much when they're so bad. Um, I mean, even Haas, right? You kind of think like when they entered the sport, how much they've grown since then. It's pretty remarkable the growth of the sport in such a short timeline, which is exciting. And I think another team, if they can muster up enough capital to enter F1, would be really exciting. But yeah, just amazing to see what the actual valuation of these teams looks like.
Yeah, it might get to the point where true constructors simply, and I know this is shocking, won't have the money to join. General Motors will not have, let's say 2 billion at that time to just sort of pluck down on Formula One to be a team, or Ford, or
I know
Audi, for example, if they haven't already. So we might need these sort of branded equity groups, these sort of agglomerations of funds to sort of be part of the whole corporatization of F1.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to get like an Apple F1 team or a Facebook F1 team. It's like these massive media companies or tech companies that would have the resources capable to actually enter the sport.
Across the line, that is our segment where we predict who will win the next race and our top 5. If we guess correctly, we get a point for each driver. If we get them in the exact spot, we get 3 points. Patrick, what are the current standings for Across the Line?
Yes, well, thanks to a few lucky after the fact penalties, you actually outscored me this week 4 points to 3. So you are sitting on 37 to my 30.
Okay, I am pulling ahead. That's good to know. Okay, so next race is Silverstone, England. That's going to be a fun one. And I'm at a loss to predict this. Max has just been doing so well, but Mercedes has promised us all their big upgrades. This is going to be their North Star and their 2 British drivers on the British track. But Ferrari have looked good recently. And Lando got more out of that McLaren than we thought. So this is going to be a good one. So I'm looking forward to see what our predictions are. So who goes first?
I believe I go first this week.
All right.
I am in agreement with you. This is a little bit of a tough one to predict. It usually is actually quite a spicy contest. At least it has been over the last few seasons. So, I think that we're going to have several Britons uh, in the top 5. I'm going to go with a crazy one and take Lando P1.
Wow, that would be fun. So but hold off. Hold off. Well, we're going to put across the line on hold for just a moment. Who do we think right now are the best British drivers on the grid? Let's rank them. Let's include Albon because he sort of claims some British status. So I am going to give mine right now. Lewis, still the best. Then Lando. Then George. Then Albon. So Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, George Russell, Alexander Albon. What about you?
That is interesting. I think Lewis Hamilton is still the best. He's fast and competitive, and I think he's more wily and creative than the other 3 are. I think I'm pretty much the same as you, though. I would go Lando, Russell, Albon.
All right.
So, yeah.
All right. Okay. Interesting. So back to across the line. You chose first. You have Lando Norris in a shocking win at Silverstone. I believe that will be his first victory, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I get to pick 1 and 2. I'm going all British. Lewis Hamilton, even though I've said before he will never win another race after Abu Dhabi 2021. And then George Russell.
Huh. A Mercedes 1-2.
A Mercedes 1-2.
I don't think that's going to happen.
If Mercedes better show up at this race. If not, then let's not pay attention to them until 2024.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Oh man. I think that leaves the door open for me, but I don't know who to take. I think I'll go with Carlos Sainz.
Wow.
And then Fernando Alonso.
Wow. All right. Well, then I'm going with Max Verstappen in third and Charles Leclerc in fourth.
Ooh. Alrighty. Who do I think is going to do well? I think that, well, I guess I'll give Perez his dues. I'll take him P4. And then I'll let's go with the Frenchman Pierre Gasly, P5.
All right. Well, I will take his teammate, the other Frenchman, Esteban Ocon, with Alpine at P5. So that means I have at Silverstone Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Esteban Ocon. You have Lando Norris, shocker, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Sergio Perez, and Pierre Gasly. Any crazy prediction for Silverstone or the season or F1 in general, Patrick?
Well, the only crazy prediction that I wrote down this week was that aside from Max and Checo Perez, Lando Norris will be the only other driver to win a race this season.
Wow. That's a good one. So all Red Bull except Lando.
Yeah.
And in Silverstone, probably. That's a good crazy prediction. I've got 2. I don't think they're as good as yours, but maybe together. First, F1 moves to Las Vegas. They are putting their own money into building that track and facilities and promoting it, unlike the other races. That's where all the people, all the media is, all the fun. I think they are going to, leave England and leave Europe even, and move their main headquarters to Las Vegas. That is my big, crazy prediction. I've got a second one. I believe it was the last race where Red Bull got their 100th win. I predict they will get to 200 wins before Mercedes.
Wow.
Well, two good. Those are two good ones. I told you. I think we had some good, crazy predictions this episode, Patrick. All right. I want to remind our listeners, send your questions or comments to hardcompoundpod@gmail.com. We may read them on the show. We definitely will read them. And thank you all for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. And we are lights out.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Good show, son. Good show. Sounded like you were at the beach. Maybe that was just the feedback in my ears.
No, I don't know why, but I have an overhead fan and it just likes to turn on randomly. And I couldn't get up to turn it off. So it was just spinning around. I don't know why.